Come to think of it, well, I got to look at this myself. Wow. What a view.
In a world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's Tuesday, the 9th of June, year of our Lord 2026. Well, today we're going to take a look at genetics, robotics, AI, and nanotech. You can remember that with the acronym GRAIN. And you can take a lot of this stuff with a grain of salt, but it presents tremendous issues to us when it is in the hands of government. And what are we going to do to stand against this? Do we understand the ethical issues involved? It's not simply a matter of technology. Continually, you see outlets like Reason just dismiss the ethical considerations of this. And so we're going to take a look at that. We're also going to take a look at the disclosure deception that's coming from Spielberg. He says it's going to shake out your faith in God. Really? Hollywood and government are going to shake your faith in God? If that's possible, you didn't have it to start with. We're going to talk about that, but we're also going to begin with looking a little bit more at what Trump did with his interview, the amazing lies that he told, as well as the amazing lie of the USS Liberty. I've got a lot more clips that I didn't play for you yesterday about that. We're going to be right back. Stay with us. You know, I think one of the most amazing things that Trump said in this interview that he had with Kristen Welker of NBC, and of course, you know, the MAGA cheerleaders are out there saying, oh, look at this. She was very upset when he got up and walked out. She said, I came all the way here to Iowa or wherever it was. You know, it took I came out in the middle of nowhere, right? Where people live in New York and California, the middle of the country is nowhere. I came out of no man's land just to interview you, and you're walking out on me. And they said, she's desperate about this. But he was the one who was desperate. He was the one who was angry. He was the one who kept repeating himself over and over again and lying in the process, whether he was talking about the slush fund or whether he was talking about his war that isn't a war. The most amazing thing he said, I think, is he said, yeah, we had a great economy and I could have kept it that way. I could have kept it that way, but I had to do something else for, as the headline on Zero Hedge, it's actually from the Bulwark. He says, for a war that isn't a war. He plays these semantic games with us. And he doesn't even pretend that he believes it. Why should I believe him when he doesn't even believe it? He says, yeah, I can't call to war. They tell me not to call to war for legal reasons. He knows that he doesn't have the authority to do anything that he's doing in the White House. He declares emergencies and he does whatever he pleases. And he says, I can do whatever I want. I just want to make sure I don't have these. So I'll call it a conflict or whatever. I'll call it a police action. Wasn't that what Truman did? There was a good video from Reason where they went through and said, oh, it's not a war. They said, really? And they go through all the different wars and all the different nicknames that they would come up with to avoid the truth of what they're doing and to avoid the Constitution's legal requirements. So in a wide-ranging interview, he touted record stock prices and he rebranded the weapons-grade uranium as nuclear dust. Trump said the quiet part out loud. The prices that Americans are paying at the pump are not an accident. This was all his decision. How many times does Trump get to confess the evil that he's done? Not calling it evil, but confessing. He says, I'm the father of the vaccine. He boasts about it. And the people who hate the vaccine the most, the people who voted for him, give him a pass. So now he says he's the father of inflation and of recession. Maybe the GOP, the Guarding Our Pedophile Party, maybe they should rename themselves a stag party for stagflation. That's what he's bringing. Actually, the drag party is more like it because, as Gerald Celente pointed out, this isn't going to be stagflation. It's not going to be stagnant. It's going to go down. It's going to be dragflation, not stagflation. So yeah, the GOP, Guarding Our Pedophiles, is the stag party. He said, I could have kept it that way. He told Kristen Welker. You know, it was kind of interesting too, because when I play the clip for you, you'll hear all this stuff. And I thought, what is that? You know, I saw all these tractors around that. First time I looked at it, I thought, is he doing an interview in a John Deere factory and they decided they couldn't shut it down for a while? No, they were in a barn and there was heavy rainfall. And so it was making that noise. And it's a little bit disturbing. I didn't take the time to filter it out, I think. I did on one of the clips, but I don't think on the clips that I decided to play today. But he said, I said, I have to take a little bit of a turn. We're going to have higher gasoline. We're going to have a little higher fertilizer, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm going to get rid of that nuclear weapon in the hands of very dangerous people. Again, he says this, and later in the interview, he says, well, basically it's entombed. You know, he has said this multiple times, by the way. We have eyes on this. We know if anybody's even going anywhere near it. They're not going anywhere near it. Since we hit it last year, I think it was a year ago, June 2025. They hit it and they said, well, yeah, people aren't really going by there. But so where is the emergency? Again, it is Netanyahu, who has been lying to us for decades. Going back to the early 1990s, he's been lying about a bomb that is imminent coming from Iran, a nuclear weapon. He has been lying on a regular basis to everybody, just like Trump. The two of them are so much alike. They have all kinds of corruption issues. They're being investigated by people for that. As a matter of fact, Trump's not being investigated enough because it's going to require something other than his corrupt Department of Justice to do an investigation. It'll have to be the Democrats in charge of the House to do an investigation. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen with it. But Netanyahu is getting investigated. The two of them strike up wars of aggression. I mean, they're just so much alike. It is amazing. Ask about the farmers because they were in Iowa. I think he said, and the fact that they can no longer afford fertilizer, Welker said 70% of them. Trump didn't even push back. Instead, he just changed the subject to loyalty. Yeah, they can't afford fertilizer, but they still love me. They'll still vote for me. They're suckers. That's right. Anybody who supports him still is a sucker. I said that 6 years ago. He locked you down. He built he paid tens of billions of dollars to create this global poison that is out there. And he locked us down. And then he ran this corrupt election of vote by mail. People are still complaining about that. He was whining about it. You know, what happened in LA? And yeah, it looks corrupt. You look at this situation, you got this reality TV guy who's running as a Republican. People thought he was going to be able to beat this horrible Democrat mayor, Karen Bass. He started by saying, I had a nice home and it got burned down, so I'm living at a trailer. But I'm not necessarily a big fan of this guy, but because they found out that he was living in one of the swankiest hotels in LA, and that's saying something. Nevertheless, he came in strong second, and then they started counting all of the mail-in ballots. And it keeps going down and down and down until yesterday, they moved the third place socialist into second place. So it'll be a runoff between the socialist now in second place and the incumbent, Karen Bass. They moved him out. I think that is clearly a case of corruption. And the bottom line is first time I've heard Mike Johnson say anything I agree with for I can't remember how long it's been. But he said, look, this should raise questions. And goes, but why are we even bothering with this? We got to get to the situation where our elections are beyond suspicion, right? It should be all of it should be above board and transparent. You should arrange it so there is no question. Otherwise, people are constantly going to be fighting about this. But again, they always ignore the fact that Trump began this vote by mail nonsense. And the corruption begins way before that. Corruption begins with the two parties who control everything, the two parties who set up gerrymandering, the two parties who set up ballot access for independents and third parties, because they don't want anybody on the ballot that isn't manipulated or chosen by the party leaders. We don't have a democracy. We have a duopoly. And it is a monopoly of these two institutions, these two political parties. They rig the debate access. They rig the ballot access. They rig the gerrymandering. They pick the voters to make sure that their party gets in and stays in. The whole thing is so corrupt that, just counting the votes is just one another aspect of it. There's nothing there to trust. Even if you had trustworthy vote counting, the whole thing has been corrupted before you even get to that point. But anyway, he just changed the subject to loyalty. He says, well, I have to take a little bit of a turn here. Yeah, a fourth turning is what he did. He said, the farmers trust me. So Bulwark makes a comment. So the economic cost of the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran is something that Americans should just be willing to eat for him. Let them eat war. How about that? Instead of anything else. This is his Marie Antoinette moment. And he does it for Israel so that he can collect his 30 pieces of silver. He's been talking about how he's the goat. Folks, he is the Judas goat. He's not the greatest of all time. He's a traitor just like Judas. And so, again, he says the oil will go down right away. It's all going to come down as soon as the war is over. No, it's not. It absolutely is not. There's no way that it's going to come down. First of all, the most optimistic petroleum experts are saying, 6 to 9 months because of what he did to the supply chains. And we saw this happen before we locked everybody down. It took a while because it creates all these traffic jams at the ports and all the rest of this stuff. It took a very long time to clear that out in LA. And so if that was all it was, just shutting things down, but they were bombing facilities, destroying production capabilities. So it's more than just a monkey wrench in the supply chain. It's more than just a massive backlog and traffic jam. Much, much more than that. And so it's going to take a lot longer to do that. So Welker pressed for a timeline. He says, well, no, you keep talking about speed. But then he referenced Vietnam as the basis for his victory. And he has the same metric for victory that Robert McNamara had for Vietnam. That should concern you, because it isn't about body count and it isn't about the number of bombs that you drop. That's not what gives you victory. We should have learned that lesson from Vietnam. We should have learned that lesson from South Korea, but we didn't. And so he's still out there boasting about that. So is Hegseth. So 70% of farmers say they can't afford fertilizer. The farmers, however, are doing well, he says. All of them support me. This is the kind of frustrating cognitive dissonance. He may actually be right about that. I mean, the opinion polls are showing that he's losing a lot of his own voters. 55% of his own 2024 voters don't like the war and want it to end. 68% of all voters want it to end, but even 55% of the people who voted for him in 2024. And so this cognitive dissonance that lets him get away with this stuff, this doublethink, the fact that we know that he's lying, but we let him get away with it. This has been something that has been drilled into them by the MAGA media, by people like Alex Jones for years, to the extent that he is inoculated from any of this stuff. They will always come up with an excuse to excuse what he's doing, even when he confesses to it like this. So it is, to summarize it, Bulwark says 55% of his own voters don't like it. They are being asked to finance a known cost today against a promised windfall on an unscheduled tomorrow, on the word of a president whose case rests on never having to name the day. That's not an economic argument. It is a leap of faith with a fuel surcharge. It's simply a lie, folks. And so he says, of course, it's the Fed's fault for not aligning with Trump's agenda. Given whispers that they're actually considering hiking rates, Trump preemptively branded the move as a crime against prosperity. Because he is a walking crime against posterity, isn't he? With all of his precedents that he is setting. That will be used by the Democrats, each and every one of them. And so he said what they do is when they raise interest rates, they try and kill success. We should actually lower interest rates. I'm telling you, he's going to do everything he can to create inflation. He has to do it just so that he can make the interest payments on the $40 trillion. The interest payments are approaching the level of defense spending, even though our defense spending is bigger than any other nation on earth, bigger already than the next 8 combined. And he wants to increase it by 50%. And yet, the interest on the debt is approaching that number. Things are so far out of whack. It's just beyond belief that anybody could try to excuse this. He says growth doesn't cause inflation. And so the comment from Bulwark says, no, apparently it takes breaking a core campaign promise to personally engineer higher prices, because that's what he's saying he did. I have to raise the oil prices here, something I got to do. He said, I'd like to see rates get lower because we could build this into the greatest machine that the world has ever seen. But you can't do that when everybody immediately raises interest rates. Have you noticed what the calculation is here with him? I mean, he doesn't even try to make a moral case for war. He holds people's lives so cheap that all that matters to him is the economics calculation that is here. That is worthy of judgment. Not by you and I, but by God. God should judge the Pentagon and Donald Trump for what they're doing. It's simply a matter of dollars and cents to them. They have no sense of ethics whatsoever. It's not even a question. Law, ethics, mass murder of people, genocide, none of that matters to them. Can they make money? Can they go in after they destroy a country and build resorts and make money? That's it. So the king of bankruptcy, not just financial, moral bankruptcy. Remember, his business was a casino. His business was ripping people off, just like Miriam Adelson. These criminals who became billionaires, as they say, behind every billionaire is a great crime. Well, or a string of casinos, which is a great crime, in my opinion. He's running the government like a failing casino, because it is a failing casino. Meanwhile, Trump insists that Iran can be starved into surrender. They try to blockade, now we blockade them. So the comment from Bulwark is, well, the valve that Trump is twisting shut to strangle Tehran is the same valve that is lifting fuel costs in Des Moines. The blockade he's celebrating and the inflation he admitted choosing are directly linked. And what happens if the talks fail? Trump didn't hedge about that. He says, well, either way we win. I think when we look at this, either way we lose. Anybody who looks soberly at what Trump is doing realizes that he got himself between Iraq and Iran, essentially here. And not just a hard place, but he's losing economically. He's losing prestige militarily. He's desperate to get out. And he is a loser, if ever there was one. But just understand that when the only thing he's focused on is money, the love of money, which this covetous, despicable pedophile pervert loves so much. The love of money is the root of all evil. You should believe that. You can see it over and over again. And so he assured Walker that the sites are under control. He can watch them from orbit. He said, yeah, if I wanted to, if you walked over there, I could read the name on your lapel. Well, you don't have to. All the names are Muhammad, right? But again, so why is he doing this? Why is he prolonging the war? He doesn't even have a reason for it anymore. He claims he did a regime change, but of course what he did was he made the regime worse in the ways that he changed it. He says he doesn't want to have nuclear weapons, and yet what he has done, it's now being pointed out by many, many people, is he has set a brush fire of nuclear proliferation throughout the Middle East, but elsewhere as well. People realize that the only way they can protect themselves from a preemptive strike by someone like Trump or someone like Netanyahu is to have nuclear weapons. And so you have incentivized a nuclear arms race with everybody. Everybody's going to be trying to acquire this. And then when you say that you've already got it entombed, but you got to get it anyway, and it's not a threat. We've got this under control, but we need to go and get it because I need a PR event. He actually said that. He needs to do it for the PR. Everything is about PR. It's all a great big professional wrestling exhibit, just like the nonsense that he's got set up for his birthday. So there's no new wars, and they get into the argument as to whether or not it's a war or not. Yes.
The clips are in the deck.
Yes, I get it. And so Trump was elected in large part on three words that he repeated from 2015 on. No new wars. I've played for you the clips where he said, well, Nancy Pelosi, she's usually pretty strong, but why didn't she impeach George W. Bush for lying us into the Iraq War? And so he has said this over and over again, and he insisted that there would be no more wars. Here's the clip.
What changed? Because you insisted no new wars.
First of all, I didn't guarantee no war.
He said it over and over again.
The strongest military in the world. I built our military. I inherited a terrible military. We had no equipment. We had nothing. I built a tremendous military. Biden gave a lot of it away, but it's still a relatively small portion compared to what I built.
But you said it over and over again, Mr.
Why would I
President?
build a military? Now, I didn't want to use this, but I'm doing you and everybody else a big favor. In the midst of the greatest stock market in history, in the midst of the most successful country, because as you know, in the last term, we were a dead country, Kristen. I know you're a big liberal or a big progressive.
No,
but
I'm just a journalist.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, in the midst of all that, I decided, well, I have to take a turn. And I've got to destroy this great economy that I built, right? This is always the thing that bothers me, whether it's Republican or Democrat. You got a good jobs report? I did that. You got a good economy? I did that. Remember, Obama even came out and said, you didn't build that. We did. The government did it. And of course, Republicans have been taking credit for the economy for a long time. They could take credit for it if they would get out of the way. But no, they take credit for it for the subsidies, for the winners that they pick, and for making other people lose. No, they don't take any risk. They don't build anything. They're takers. They don't take risks. They take your capital. They take your labor. They're parasites. And so he says, yeah, I didn't promise any more wars. Why did you think I would build the biggest military anywhere if I didn't want to use it in a war? Exactly right. And we've said this for the longest time. Having this bloated, gigantic war machine that they steal so much money from us for and create so much debt. This massive war machine is an incentive to use it. And he admitted that as well. Why would we have the biggest military in the world if we're not going to use it? And of course, the military-industrial complex wants their weapons used so they can replenish them. But actually, he did say over and over and over again, and so did his surrogates. Tulsi Gabbard said it. J.D. Vance said it. They all said, no, we're not going to get you into another war. Those people who did that, they are reprehensible. They should have been impeached.
So when you say I promised, I didn't promise anything. I don't like these endless wars. This is not an endless war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars. No more wars, no more disruptions. We will have prosperity and we will have peace. Under Trump, we will have no more wars, no more disruptions, and we will have prosperity and peace for all.
He's such a liar.
I am the candidate of peace. I am peace.
Yeah, he's such a liar. Just over and over again. One guy put together, I think it was 32 times that Trump said that or something like that. He put together a long clip of cuts from that. So, yeah, it's not a war, by the way. It's a military exercise. And that was another thing that he made very clear to everybody.
Later, and we had a deal. I was going there, and I didn't want to go during the war. I said, look, we have a thing called a war, or as they would rather say, a military operation. This is for legal reasons. I say military because as a military operation, I don't need any approvals. As a war, you're supposed to get approval from Congress, something like that. So I call it a military operation.
It is what it is, and we all see what it is, regardless of what this liar calls it. So as Bulwark says, he's now prosecuting 2 wars at once. He won't call either one of them a war. His defense from the beginning to the end is not strategic. It's simply linguistic. No, it's not even linguistic. It's not strategic. It's not linguistic. It's not even semantic. It's just a lie. He's nothing other than a common liar. Let's not give him some help with all this stuff. He probably can't even spell linguistic or semantic. Let's not help him out here. He's simply a common liar, a common thief, a common murderer who has murdered millions of people with his jabs as he stole money from us and handed it over to Pfizer and these other companies as well. Now he's doing it with the military-industrial complex. Always the same thing, even if he's got a different MacGuffin. It's always about stealing and murdering, isn't it? He says, I call it a military exercise because people would rather have it called that. It's not a big war for us. No, it's not. So again, pressed on the naval blockade of Iran, which is under international law itself an act of war. They attacked with bombs or whatever. I don't know if they dropped bombs or they shot it up, but they attacked a commercial vessel because they said we got a blockade and they wanted to run our blockade. So they physically attacked it. That's not a war. That's a military exercise. Yeah, attacking civilians. He said, I don't consider that a war, but if you want to define it as such, I guess you can. It is a war, and it is a war for Israel. Let's understand exactly what it is. He said you could say that it's regime change, actually, because there are very different people there. Well, they're not really all that different, but they are worse, and they are angrier than they were before at America, at Israel. When you got the guy that's there right now, he was nearly killed. I don't know what shape he is in. People haven't seen him since the attack. Who knows what condition he's in? His father, his family were killed. You think he is friendlier to the United States now? How ridiculous. And then he says, we've only had 13 people killed. And that includes 2 wars. That's Venezuela and that's Iran. Well, wait a minute. You just called them wars again. I thought they were military exercises. Anyway, just think about that. It doesn't really matter to him that 13 people died. It may matter to their families. I'm sure it does. It doesn't matter to him. He doesn't care about the military. He's as contemptuous of the military as Henry Kissinger was. They're just animals. I don't care. Their inventory, their livestock. He really doesn't care. And so he's doing better than Vietnam because the number of people that he got killed is not as high. And we've dropped a lot of bombs on them. So I guess by that metric, we won Vietnam and we won the Korean War, didn't we? Because we certainly did outbomb them in both of those cases. And we outkilled them as well. He said, you can hold a man, this is Bulwark, can hold a man to a promise. What you cannot do is hold him to a war that he will not admit or a pledge that he insists he never made. Well, I just have to say, that's the way the Bulwark summarizes this. I just have to say, well, liars are going to lie, aren't they? That's why you don't want to have a man of low character. Character matters. This is a guy who cheated on every one of his wives. Now, that's not uncommon in our day and age. But the way that he publicly humiliated them, just like he publicly humiliates every person that he kicks out of his regime. You know, he brings them in, he lavishes flattery and praise on them far more than they deserve. And then when he kicks them out for whatever reason, he comes after them viciously, following them and attacking them. That's what he did with his wives. That should have been a signal. Anybody who can do that to their family, do that to their wife, will do it to everyone, not just the people that work for him. He'll do it to his own voters. He'll do it to his own country. He will betray us to another country, which is precisely what he's done. He said, I had to stop a country that's very powerful, very dangerous, from having a nuclear weapon because they would use it. Well, then you should focus on Israel. Stop them. It's Mark Levin and other traitors like Jonathan Pollard who won't stop pushing to use nuclear weapons. Jonathan Pollard says, well, for some reason in the West, because people in the West have a society that's not based on his Judaism, not based on his rabbinic Judaism. It's based on Christian principles. He says, yeah, people in the West are really afraid to use nuclear weapons. So they're just another tool. We can just kill more people with it, so we should use it. And Mark Levin is pushing it as well. I wouldn't be surprised to see Huckabee start to push it as well, because Mark Levin's son arranged for Jonathan Pollard to meet with Huckabee. Huckabee thinks the world of this traitor because he's a traitor himself. Pollard won't stop pushing to use the nuclear weapons, and these are weapons that Israel has, but Iran does not have. So Iran has these weapons that they won't admit to. Jonathan Pollard always teases the fact that he blackmailed America, or Israel blackmailed America with nuclear weapons. So take a look at that plane. It's got, see the nuclear weapons on it? Well, I can't call them nuclear weapons. I'll call them unconventional weapons of mass destruction. How about that? Wink, wink. And he said, so we just showed him the plane, and we said, give us the weapons that we demand from you, or we will use that. And what happened to America after we gave them the weapons? And of course we say we. It was Henry Kissinger. Even though he was Jewish, he was not Zionist enough for the traitor Jonathan Pollard. And so when Kissinger gave them the weapons, what we got out of that, we got the blessing of Israel, the curse of Israel, actually. We got the OPEC oil embargo as punishment for giving them the weapons that they used nuclear blackmail to twist Kissinger's arms. And so all of this, Trump's surrogate promise that he'd have no new wars, Tulsi, JD, the rest. Zelensky never believed that. I didn't believe it either. By the way, go to trendsjournal.com and you can get 10% off. And he's not going to, these guys never fooled Gerald. You knew what they were up to. Trump never fooled him either. Trump is out there making these ridiculous claims. Well, we wouldn't have had the Russians invade Ukraine if I'd been president. Yeah, right. And then he says he's going to stop it within 24 hours of getting elected. And then he starts saying, I can stop it even before I get elected. And here we are, more than 100 days after his election. That was on Sunday, I think. And he hasn't done anything. Instead, this guy who's so covetous of the Nobel Peace Prize has done nothing to stop the war in Ukraine. And he boasts about Venezuela and Iran, even though he has nothing at all to boast about. But again, he is just a liar extraordinaire. And as a matter of fact, before we take a break, I want to play this for you. This is a discussion that Tucker Carlson had about Butler and whether that fake assassination was fake or not.
He was the target of the assassination attempt, which you have said, and I agree with you, was real. Like someone tried to kill him.
I don't agree with that.
Killed somebody else. But if the president wanted this investigation...
It was not real, Tucker. Come on.
Correct?
Presumably, yeah. Maybe in his first administration, you could argue that he didn't have total control over the deep state or whatever. But now, yeah, he's got loyalists installed in most of the key positions. So, I don't see any possible excuse for why.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not it's not just that, Kash Patel's incompetent or Dan Bongino's incompetent. This is a statement of fact. Trump shut down the investigation into Butler.
Mm-hmm.
So he shut down the investigation into his own attempted murder. And I think that's the most shocking fact to come out of this Trump term. Because
so what does that tell you?
see a non-sinister explanation for that, but maybe you have one.
No, I mean, it's just total speculation, but sometimes I wonder, did they stumble onto some sort of like MK Ultra program? I don't know. Are they threatening Trump's family? You're suggesting, something more disturbing going on. And
I'm suggesting a fact pattern, a known fact pattern that has no non-sinister explanation that I can think of. That's all I'm saying.
Sure.
So I can't, and trust me, I've brought this to a lot of different people. Like, what is this?
Well, if there's no non-sinister explanation, maybe the explanation is sinister.
Well, actually, what you're missing is this. Here's why Trump shut down the investigation, which he did. Fact, obviously, but it is also fact. I know it, and so I've never had any person say, don't jump to conclusions. Actually, there's a good explanation. I still don't see, and you just wrote a book on it. You don't see one either.
No, absolutely not. No.
Well, he should listen to Arthur Conan Doyle, the guy who made deductive reasoning famous. The guy who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories. He said, when you rule out the impossible, what remains, no matter how improbable, is the truth. And the truth is that he shut down the investigation. And the truth is that his ear is just fine and always was just fine. He was never shot in the ear. Trump faked that like he's faked everything else. He's an inveterate liar. Before we take a break, some of the comments here. Marky Mark, thank you. He says, who would Israel have bombed with those nukes? The A-4 Pollard mentioned couldn't even make it from Israel to the U.S. Who were they blackmailing then? Well, I played it. I played the clip several different times because he's gone on several different programs and talked about this. The first time I played it, he was saying that they wanted the weapons because they were at war with Egypt. And he said they were threatening to drop the nukes on Egypt. And that was the blackmail. So you either give us the weapons to fight Egypt or we'll nuke Egypt. That was what Jonathan Pollard was telling them. I should make that clear. I get into trouble sometimes when I start to do shortcuts, assuming that I just don't want to be too repetitive on what I have to say. I guess I repeat enough of it, but sometimes I leave out something like that. But that's what it was. He was threatening to say, give us weapons to go to war with Egypt, or we will drop a nuclear bomb on Egypt. That was what he was saying. And that's what he is demanding now. He says, first we do an EMP pulse over Iran, then we hit them with real nukes, right? And you got Mark Levin, probably Ben Shapiro as well, constantly pushing this to Trump as well.
Yeah, it was something like, if you don't give us the regular weapons, we can use, what was it, like I said, a Japanese style response?
Yeah.
Wink,
wink, Yeah, we have this unconventional weapon, which I can't mention, right? But we'll use that. It'll be a Japanese-like response. Yeah, thank you, Lance. He's such a sleazebag. The guy just disgusts me beyond belief. Traitorous. The country that he grew up in, the country that gave him everything, and you see this over and over again because these people are racist. These Zionist Jews, they hate everybody who is not Jewish. And they're not even Jewish themselves. They're the synagogue of Satan. AP Rumble Seat. Looks like Iran war is about finally breaking world economies to usher in a digital prison currency and central governance. That's exactly what it is. I've said over and over again, Trump is a one-man fourth turning. You know what he said? Yeah, we were doing really well, but I said, hey, I've got to take a turn. I've got to take a fourth turning here. Yeah, let's create depression, global depression, and a world war, because that's what we need in order to restructure society. So let's help it along a little bit. We've got this, people are disgusted with the institutions now. We've gone about 70 years since the last one, 70, 80 years, just like the fourth turning. So let's go ahead and run this thing through. Guard Goldsmith, good to see you, Guard. Liberty Conspiracy. Someone ought to ask Trump if the farmers can afford to send him political donations the way the Israelis do. That's absolutely right. Yeah. Now he's putting them out of business. He's it's everything for Israel, nothing for his own people. Marky Mark, he says that makes sense since Egypt was in the Soviet orbit. Had Israel nuked Egypt, the USSR would have been involved. At that point, all bets would have been off. Absolutely. Yeah, that was, you're exactly right. You know, to kick that off, Israel was willing to do the nuclear blackmail, willing to start a global nuclear war. And they still are, because there's plenty of people there, just like Jonathan Pollard. Miriam Adelson endorses him 100%. She flew him to Israel. And Benjamin Netanyahu was there to meet the two of them as they got off of her private jet. They're all along that same page. The walrus says he's doing what he's supposed to do. He's not losing. He's following the plan. His job is to rein in and to accelerate the decline. I agree. Guard Goldsmith again, he says, what a dirtball he is. Yeah. To recursively push at NBC to try to ride his previously justified anger at bad reporting when she asked valid questions. It truly is revolting. Yeah, and he was absolutely kept getting more and more angry, more and more desperate until he walked out, because he kept repeating himself about his corrupt slush fund. And I talked about that yesterday. I said, yeah, he goes on and on and on about how these people, the J6ers, suffered, how their lives were disrupted and the way they suffered. They deserve compensation. That was never what his $10 billion lawsuit was about. And if that's not a part of that lawsuit, that's another slush fund area of that. You can't take money that was a settlement. You can't, first of all, sue yourself. It has to be an adversarial thing. Secondly, he was going to do it all in secret. Thirdly, he makes it about the J6ers because he knows how obviously corrupt this is. He knows how this looks to everybody. And you can't be more blatant about it. That's why I played that clip from that one movie where the wife walks in and catches a guy in bed with another woman. And she said, what are you doing? What are you talking about? Nothing. As the two of them are getting up and getting dressed, and she leaves. And then, he keeps saying, what? I don't know. You're not talking about, same thing that Trump was doing with Kristen Welker. And then finally the woman is gone, and she says, yeah, you were with that woman. He says, what woman? There's nobody here. That's exactly what Trump does all the time. It's not even funny anymore when you look at it. We'll be right back.
Using free speech to free minds. It's the David Knight Show.
APS Radio delivers multiple channels of music right to your mobile device. Get the APS Radio app today and listen wherever you go.
Well, as I said earlier, and I need to correct it, I said it'd take 6 to 9 months is what most of the petroleum experts are saying. Well, 6 to 8 is what one of them said. This is the guy who's the head of petroleum analysis at GasBuddy. He said Trump made a lot of miscalculations. And until he comes to the realization that he needs to solve this, nothing is going to happen. Well, again, I don't think he necessarily wants to solve it. I think that really that my belief is the same as what I just read the comments from the listeners. He is the one man forth turning to take all this stuff down. Opening the Strait of Hormuz likely wouldn't immediately bring fuel prices down to pre-war levels. It could take 6 to 8 months in the best case scenario to reopen the Strait of Hormuz if an agreement was reached today. And again, we go back to the OPEC 1973, last time that we were cursed for Israel's benefit. Gas prices went up by, oil prices, I should say, went up by 4 times, fourfold. And they didn't really ever come back down again. Prior to that, gas was something like $3 or $4 a barrel. I think it was $3 a barrel, and went up to 12. Housing is it an asset in a bubble economy, or is it really a shelter? Is it something that we need and use? This is Charles Hugh Smith of Two Minds, is his website here. He says, and I'm going to get a lot of pushback on this because it's true. Either housing is shelter or housing is just another asset in a bubble economy. It can't be both. So the conversion of housing from shelter into just another asset bubble that is bubbling higher in a bubble-dependent economy has been so profitable for those who are inflating the bubble. And again, it's the same type of thing that we saw done to Bitcoin, for example. Bitcoin was initially set up to be an alternative to cash and just to process transactions. But then it became an asset in a bubble economy. And the same thing has been done with real estate. He says, whenever I suggest that housing is being hoarded by the wealthy and the corporations as a low-risk asset to park credit-generated capital, I get pushback. He says, no, I'm told the percentage of housing that is owned by the wealthy and the corporations is tiny, as is the percentage of housing owned as short-term vacation rentals. And I've had guests who have made that exact point. Now, again, what he's pointing out, he said that that's a baseless claim because there's nobody that tracks that. He says that's based on completely fraudulent and inaccurate statistics. He said there is no regulatory system that audits whether or not owners who obtained owner-occupied mortgages actually live in the dwellings, or whether owners, especially those that are hidden behind LLCs and other cloaking mechanisms, are, quote, owner occupants, as claimed. As a matter of fact, that's what Pulte did for Trump against Trump's enemies. He went through and he audited, and he did it to Letitia James. He did it to Lisa Cook with the Federal Reserve. I think he did it to Adam Shifty Schiff. So he went back and he looked at the mortgages, but they don't typically do that. I mean, he did that by auditing them personally with artificial intelligence. There is no government statistics that track any of that stuff. He said when he rented a house, or stayed in a house that belonged to a friend in Japan, he said they were there for a couple of days and the Japanese police came by and said, tell us who you are, that type of thing. He said they keep track of that. We don't do that. And I don't think we want the government to do that, as a matter of fact. But nevertheless, owner occupancy fraud has been suggested as a contributor to the housing bubble. We show that it was pervasive and it remains present, said the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve itself said that. Pulte knows that because, his family's in the business of selling houses retail. And so he knows a lot of people are coming in and saying that they are going to be owner-occupied because they get favorable terms on the mortgage, but they wind up using it as investment property. He said, in other words, even the most cursory audits, like this one from the Federal Reserve in Philadelphia, find significant percentages of quote-unquote owner-occupied housing is actually vacant most or all the time, and it is an unregistered short-term vacation rental. The monetize your empty room Airbnb idea that began the short-term vacation rental market has transmogrified into a monster consuming the housing market in resort locales. Surveys have found that 15% or more of all available housing in resort locales is now absentee owner short-term vacation rentals. 2/3 of condominium buyers are out of state. We actually found this when we tried to move to this area. I mean, most of the real estate listings that we were looking at until we changed location were all based around, Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge area. And it's so many vacation rentals, and the prices of them were so elevated. It was ridiculous what they're charging per square foot. So we went elsewhere. But that absolutely is true in resort areas. Some have argued it doesn't matter because resort housing tends to be in rural regions with few jobs, but it matters to the local residents who are priced out. And there is no system of auditing who actually lives in a dwelling, who is a permanent resident, because in America, we would see this as an invasion of privacy. And it is. And so unless you are an enemy of Trump and he gets he gets his guy who's trying to curry favor with him, and it certainly did work because he did such a good job of investigating Trump's personal enemies that Trump is keeping him at the housing place, but now he's got another hat to wear. He's going to be director of national intelligence, taking Tulsi Gabbard's place. And meanwhile, the result of all this is that Americans' average monthly payment has now topped $2,000 for the first time ever, as people are being squeezed by this inflationary push here. Moody's Analytics says that now in its fourth month, the conflict, they say. No, it's not the conflict. It's now Trump's war for Israel is now in its fourth month. And the cost is nearly $750 per household. Think about that. 400 of that is gasoline alone, direct cost of this. And that's going to continue to percolate through the economy. No doubt about it. Meanwhile, airlines are taking a 50% profit hit due to a $100 billion jet fuel increase. It hits everything. And just like I said, when Trump was saying, well, they got to get the measles shot. It's going around. Everybody's got to get the shot. I said, well, he's older than I am. And when he was a kid, they didn't have a measles shot. Everybody was getting measles and everybody got over it. It was very, very rare. It truly was rare for people to have a serious reaction to it. And so I said, he knows better than that. Well, he also knows better in terms of the oil embargo that he has created. He lived through the 1973 oil embargo. He knows the knock-on effects, and he knows how that continued to build for years. Yet he did it anyway. So again, I think it is deliberate. When you look at these things, just like the lies about the Butler assassination. Yeah, Butler did it right. No, the Butler didn't do it. It didn't happen. Trump did it. And I've said, and I believe it, he took a dive and he cut himself, just like all of his professional wrestling buddies do. Probably taught him how to do it. Global airlines, however, are going to collectively pay $100 billion more for jet fuel this year than last year. And when we put those stickers up that say Trump did it on the gas, on the automobile gas pumps, you ought to put Trump did it for Israel, right? That's the full truth that is there. So jet fuel is costing 70% more year over year, and the global airline industry's net profits will be cut in half from what they were last year. Well, we look at the bubbles that are there and the bubbles that are being burst. The next mania is going to be it was interesting to talk to that author last week about space capitalism, and he's a big fan of Elon Musk. I'm not such a fan of it. Well, I just listen to what the guy has to say. He was very, very interesting perspective on a lot of different aspects of that. But, when you look at the practical aspects of it, as Lance has pointed out many times, even this Gerard K. O'Neill idea that Yeah, we go to the moon and we just, we don't have to really worry about getting any EPA permits or anything. We just scrape whatever we want off the ground, put it on some maglev rails, and we just shoot it to that stationary orbit of this thing in the Lagrange libration point. It's not going to be moving. It's going to just be in the same spot, so we can build a rail and just shoot it right up to it. Then they can just process it in space, almost free energy, because you utilize the thermal differences between something that's extremely cold in space and something that's extremely hot in space. Just by painting it white or black, you can get those two types of heat extremes. And those differences in temperature can be exploited for manufacturing. However, as Lance has pointed out to me multiple times, I tell him about that, he says, yeah, but space is a vacuum. It doesn't really work that easily out there. There's a lot of issues with all this stuff, just like there's a lot of issues going out and grabbing platinum off of an asteroid. Think about it from the standpoint, just like when I was talking about the impossibility of interplanetary space travel and the massive amounts of energy necessary to get up to speed. And then to reduce your speed, you'd have to carry a tremendous amount of fuel. And once you get to that really high speed, you've got to have a really heavily armored spacecraft, because at the speeds that they're talking about for interstellar travel, you would have just small particles that are out in space would go right through your spaceship unless it's heavily armored, just like a bullet. So then that extra armor creates even more problems, just like that extra fuel that you have to slow yourself down, because there is no friction up there. So you have that same type of thing if you're trying to go to an asteroid. You got to get to a tremendous speed, and then you got to match the speed of this thing. You got to slow it down, and then you got to find some way to get the stuff off and bring it back without having it burn up coming through the atmosphere along with yourself. Well, I mean, there's a lot of different issues that are involved with all this stuff.
I mean, they monitor these near-miss asteroids like one he's talking about, because it would be a problem if it were to hit Earth at these velocities that they're going. You have to slow it down. So if they're mining, say, 100 tons of platinum, they've got to bring up enough fuel to slow down 100 tons of platinum to the point where it's not going to create a crater when it hits Earth.
Yeah, or whatever they take off of it. Yeah, or whatever they take off of it has that momentum. So they may not slow down the entire asteroid, but whatever they pull off of it, they got to slow it down. So yeah, there's a lot of issues with that. And so we run into the same kind of stuff with SpaceX's IPO. This article from Futurism says his IPO is virtually impossible. The investors will need to drink a lot of Kool-Aid. Well, that doesn't seem to be in short supply with the technocrats or the MAGA crowd. They seem to have an abundance of Kool-Aid, and we don't need to go to the moon to get it either. It's all right around us. So it's the next mania, I think, and it is something of a meme stock. This is kind of the Doge of the stock market. Is out there that meme going to do is pushing. SpaceX is slated to go public this week at a market cap of nearly $2 trillion, $1.75 trillion. SpaceX lost a staggering $4.9 billion last year, while only raking in $18.7 billion. So that's a pretty large loss as a percentage of their income. According to Wall Street veteran and corporate financial expert David Traynor, SpaceX would need to hit a revenue target of $1.1 trillion, almost 60 times what it made in 2025, to become a worthy buy with an actual return for investors, higher than the highest annual revenues posted by any company ever. That was a record that was set by Amazon, which raked in $742 billion across the last 4 quarters. So they would have to go from 742 to 1.1 trillion, 742 billion. So SpaceX would have to increase its sales by a whopping 50% every year for a decade. No company has even come close to achieving that. And so it is interesting when you look at what Musk has done. He basically has established nearly a monopoly on launching satellites, as well as everything else. He is the go-to guy. So don't know. I certainly am not going to bet on it. I don't bet on the stock market. It is a casino. Absolutely is a casino. But when I talked to him, the first thing I thought about was his obsession with Mars. And he was saying, well, he makes a lot of money with SpaceX. We'll see. Of course, he could depending on how this thing works out, he could make a tremendous amount of money off of the stock sale, just like Trump did selling meme coins. But his obsession is Mars. And if he sees SpaceX as a way of funding his Mars obsession, I don't see the Mars thing making money for anybody. I see it as another one of these. When you look at the settlement of the New World, you had multiple companies in Virginia. They all went bankrupt. The Massachusetts Bay Colony managed, and these were privately set up. They got investors to put their money in, and they were going to get a big return. And you could make a great case for that. You can make a much better case for making money settling North America than you could for making money settling Mars. And there was an abundance of natural resources, and people were able to live off the land, unlike Mars. And so even they went bankrupt. I just don't see this thing making it whatsoever. But it will be interesting to watch this go through. Meanwhile, let's take a look at what's going on with gold. Gold erases the losses despite strong U.S. jobs data yesterday. It's up, it's down, and we look at this again as ceasefire hopes are there. So think about this. These are reactions to the jobs data, which I said yesterday, I think it's a bunch of lies and nonsense. We're supposed to believe there were 70,000 jobs created in the leisure industry. Seriously? Well, if that were true, it would be seasonal at best. But I don't think it's true, because I think all the indications that I've seen, except for the federal government, which is always lying to us, we had seen everybody in tourist areas were talking about how bad tourism was. It's expensive for people to travel. It's expensive to take the plane flights now, thanks to Trump. But people don't want to come to America from other countries for the most part. Are being boycotted by people from Canada and Europe. And so that doesn't ring true to me at all. And of course, the ceasefire hopes don't ring true at all. I'd say there's not a chance that Hormuz opens, nacho. And so when we look at all this, the back and forth of all this, what's making it go up, making it go down, is just a bunch of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about things that are not even really true. Gold is real. Gold is physical. And so, again, just don't be gaslit by what is happening in this casino that we call Wall Street. So gold went down to $4,300, $4,363, I think it is. And really, that is being driven by speculation, lies, and by rumor. Trump said on Monday that both Israel and Iran were looking to do, quote, an immediate ceasefire. Do you believe that? I've got a bridge I can sell you if you believe that. That final negotiations on peace were proceeding. This is the guy who says it's not even a war. But he's going to bring you peace at any moment now, just like he did with Ukraine. He's going to do it in 24 hours. And, of course, the farmers are also doing great. You can believe everything that Trump says. You can take it to the bank. No, actually, the reality is, and we all know this, the inflation is worse. The debt is much worse. And these effects of inflation, debt, tariffs have not even begun to take effect, let alone the oil embargo and the war and all the rest of this stuff. I mean, while he is building up this, it's like storing up wrath like a dam that's about to burst over our heads. And everybody is hanging on every pronouncement from this proven liar. It's just amazing to me. So as the different gold publications are looking at, gold could test $4,000 support as inflation risks loom, but long-term bullish outlook remains. Some analysts believe that investors should ignore the noise and focus on the bigger picture. You have the noise of Trump's mouth that's out there all the time. The last time gold prices dropped below the 200-day moving average in September 2023, the breakdown led to a further 5% decline. So, when you look at this, it's just another argument, I think, for doing the dollar cost averaging that you can do with Tony with Wolfpack. If you get into Wolfpack, you can just buy the stuff over a period of time and it averages out. We know where this is going long term. Again, as Gerald Celente says, I don't make predictions, but I look at trends. We know where the trend is headed. We don't know the exact timing. And again, all of the day-to-day prices are based on fear, uncertainty, doubt, rumors, and lies that you see out there. Gold's inability to sustain gains above the 4,500 region ultimately left the market vulnerable to deeper correction, with a break beneath the 200-day moving average accelerating down. The real advantage of the charts is just really to try to scope out the psychology of the people who are doing this kind of stuff. But again, I don't really worry too much about that kind of stuff, because if the people are going to react to things that Trump says and keep reacting to it, and it's going up, it's going down, because he's changing his pronouncements about what he's going to do on a daily basis, multiple times a day. Rising inflation may push real rates lower, setting the stage for gold's next rally, says one investment house here. Of course, again, when we look at this, it's not simply about the interest rates. The thing that is perhaps as big, if not bigger, is the quantitative easing, the printing of money. And that has already started in a big way. And that is something that they can do under the radar that nobody pays any attention to. So even if they leave the interest rates where they are, or they raise them or they lower them, the market will have the final say in what the real interest rates are, regardless of what the Federal Reserve does. And what the Federal Reserve is doing that really affects the economy is the quantitative easing, the printing of the fiat currency. The Fed can't fix what Trump is doing with the wars. They can't fix that with a rate change. Instead, what they're doing is they're adding debt. They've lost a lot of their leverage that they had 50 years ago with the OPEC oil embargo. They've lost a lot of that leverage by losing the petrodollar. So rising inflation fears, and this threat could be gold's greatest long-term strength, because that is the reality. If you do start seeing economic deceleration, that's another reason for gold prices to rally, said one person. Gold tends to do well in recessionary scenarios. It is a very strong defensive asset. Interest payments on U.S. government debt are approaching levels comparable to military spending. Again, it is going to be as big as our bloated Department of War budget, raising questions about the long-term sustainability of fiscal policy. You know, I was thinking about this yesterday, and I thought, what if we all decide that we want to secede because we don't want to have the federal government's debt burden on us? That could be something that would fuel a breakup of this evil entity we call the federal government, the United States government. That would make a lot of sense to me if people in various states said, well, we want to be independent of the federal government because we don't want to have that massive $40 trillion debt that we have to pay off. And we don't want to be held responsible for that. That's the federal government's thing. Maybe that's the way out of this thing, to repudiate the federal government, to repudiate its debt. Just kidding. I don't know how we can do that. We're sitting on a bargain in gold right now, he said. This guy, his name is Shaw. Interestingly enough, not related to the king of Persia. So again, go to davidknight.gold, and that'll take you to Tony Arterburns' Wise Wolf. You can dollar cost average your stuff by just setting up a monthly savings program, or if you want to set up an IRA, or you want to move large amounts of money into real money, into gold or silver, Tony can help you with that. Again, davidknight.gold will take you to Tony Arterburn, and we're going to take you to a break right now. We'll be right back.
In a world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Elvis.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
And the sweet sounds of Motown. Find them on the Oldies channel at apsradio.com.
Welcome back. During the break, Lance had a comment that I thought was really good. Tell everybody what you told me, Lance.
Yeah, I didn't get this to Dad for the show, but I saw this thing about how there's a huge gap between sellers and buyers, one of the largest in history in the U.S. market, and yet house prices are still extremely inflated. And that, to me, might indicate that it's a lot of institutional buying from a few small buyers.
Yeah,
The last time there was a huge gap was during his COVID disruption.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's artificial stuff like that. And of course, some of the artificial things that are driving up the price of housing is, mandates in terms of regulation and building codes and things like that. Just it drives up the cost of cars, and also the interest rates that are there. All these different things are driving it up. It is a problem that he's not even interested in. He's only interested in serving the needs of Israel. Let's talk a little bit about what we need to do in terms of preparing, because gold and silver is a part of it, and it has an important role. But there are other things as well. This is sent to me by listener Mary, who is, and it's actually a Jack Lawson article that he cross-posted on his Substack, and added some comments to it. And we have cross-posted Jack Lawson's article about this as well. And again, you can get more information at jacklawsonbooks.com. But just to give you an idea of what this is about, and it's an excellent article. When a barter economy collapse takes hold, the most immediately valuable commodities are the ones that keep people alive. Food rises to the top in any trade hierarchy almost instantly. During the siege of Sarajevo in the 1990s, a single cigarette could purchase bread. A can of meat was the equivalent of several days' wages. The hierarchy of need in a collapsed economy is brutal in its simplicity. People will trade almost anything for food when hunger sets in. Long shelf-life foods carry the most trade value because they can be stored, transported, and positioned without requiring refrigeration or cooking fuel. Canned goods, dried beans, rice, oats, and freeze-dried meals have all historically functioned as informal currency during extended crises. Salt, which seems almost comically mundane in a grocery store context, has served as literal money for most of human history and retains enormous barter value in any prolonged disruption because of its role in food preservation. Roman soldiers were famously paid partly in salt, which is the root of the word salary. And of course, we're talking about somebody not being worth his salt or whatever, but this is kind of driven home to us when we took the family to Salzburg, Austria, which literally means salt city. And if you've seen The Sound of Music, you've seen the very elaborate palace that belonged to the archbishop there. He actually built it for his mistress. You know, he's supposed to be celibate, but he had a mistress, and he built this lavish place where they were in the movie where they're playing in the gardens and everything. He built that in the face of everybody. This hypocrisy that is there. It's kind of like Trump and his pedophile crew that's there. That type of in-your-face hypocrisy, I think, is really what destroyed Christianity in Europe, and it's going to destroy our country here as well. But there were salt mines there, and actually went down the salt mine as well. It was a lot of fun. They had it's kind of like sliding down a banister. That's the way the guys would go to work in the morning. It was all downhill in the morning, but then after working in the salt mines all day, they had to climb out themselves. They didn't have any way to lift them out. It's kind of a depressing thought. You know, in the morning, everything is great. You know, you're all fresh and you go sliding down the banister to get down to the bottom of the salt mine. But then you got to hoof it out of there after a long day's work. But they made a lot of money. There was a lot of money, and it went to this particular guy who was really kind of the political head as well as the church head in that area. And so that is a long-standing thing. But I digress here. The point is, this was a cross post from Bob Rogers that Jack Lawson put up, and we cross-posted it as well. So one of the things that I remember is an interview that I had with a missionary who was in Romania, and he was talking about how bad things were in Romania with the communists there. And he said, he got to know the farmers that were there, and the farmers were basically left alone by the Romanian communists. They were the only ones who were left alone because they needed the food. And so they had a degree of autonomy and freedom that nobody else in Romania did. And of course, as part of that, they would have to they would give extra food to these communist officials who were having difficulty getting it themselves. So they left these guys alone. They had autonomy, and they even bribed the communist officials with food, and they left them alone. You do have insane dictators like Stalin, like Mao, who intentionally starve their people. I could put Trump in that category too, and actually I will put him in that category as an insane dictator who starves his own people. And it's just not to the degree yet that Stalin and Mao did. But the article says most people have never had to think seriously about what happens when money stops working. And we're not talking about just inflation chewing away your purchasing power or a bank account that gets frozen during a dispute. A full-scale situation where the currency in your wallet happens to be as useful as scrap paper, or say toilet paper, really. It's happened many times throughout history, more times than most people want to acknowledge. And so we all know about the Weimar Republic. We don't know, many of us, the details of really what happened in Venezuela, the near total economic disintegration that was there. Monetary systems failed. Human beings will adapt by falling back on direct exchange. No central bank is required, no credit score, and the SWIFT transfer doesn't have to apply here. It's just whether or not you have the goods in hand and the willingness to negotiate. Understanding a barter economy collapse is not about embracing doom. The people who fared the best were the ones who had thought about it ahead of time and who had stocked some practical items and developed skills that their community actually needed, just like those farmers in Romania. So this article breaks down the mechanics of what happens during an economic collapse and which goods have historically functioned as money when paper currency fails, and what you can realistically do today to prepare for a scenario where your debit card means nothing and your pantry means everything. So I'm not going to go into the details of this, but I wanted to give you a taste of it, a taste of food preparation here. Because it is a very long article. There's a lot of great information in it. And again, we have posted up Jack Lawson's article. And one of the first things that they talk about, of course, is water. And if you go to jacklawsonbooks.com, Jack has got a free chapter about water preparation in the books. He's put that up on the internet for you to read. And it is a 2-volume set of books. It's a wealth of information. And if you take a look at that free article he's got about water, you will see just how valuable the information is that he's got. But this is broken down into, I'll just read you the different, there's like 10 different sections that they talk about here. First of all, understanding what triggers a barter economy collapse. Then food and water, the foundation of any post-collapse trade system. Alcohol, tobacco, and the psychology of vice goods in a crisis. He talks about that. He says, that's really, really valuable if you've got things like alcohol and tobacco, any of that kind of vice stuff, because it is habit forming, which means that the demand for it is going to be strong. It's going to remain strong. And we have seen this, whether you're talking about prisons today or whether you're talking about prisons in the past or prisoner of war camps. I mean, just think back to the character that they had in The Great Escape, James Garner, the scrounger. He was always there with cigarettes, trading the cigarettes and so forth. But nevertheless, medical supplies, prescription medications as crisis currency, precious metals and their complicated role in a barter economy collapse, tools, seeds, and practical skills have become priceless. The fuel, fire, and energy controlling the power and warmth of mobility, hygiene products and sanitation supplies in an economic collapse, and communication, security, and information, and finally, building a barter economy collapse-ready stockpile without going broke. It's a great article. I highly recommend it. And again, we're going to cross-post it on our Substack today, and I would recommend that you take a look at it. He begins by talking about what happened in Venezuela, which I didn't cover at the time, and it's not really something I looked into, but he points out the fact that in such an oil-rich country, people were paying for gasoline at the pump by giving them food, cigarettes or something like that. So people would show up. The currency was absolutely worthless. So people would show up with food or something like that to pay for the gasoline in a country that's probably got more proven oil reserves than any other country. I think that's true. It's more than Saudi Arabia. It's one of the reasons why Trump, as a pirate, attacked them. When we look at this, it's an excellent article. I'd highly recommend it. And again, I would also highly recommend Civil Defense Manual that you'll find at jacklawsonbooks.com. You really do need to think about where this is all headed. And there's so many different MacGuffins that they throw out there to create crises and emergencies all the time. Here's a good example of one. This is, let's see if I can find this here. Yeah, this was sent to me by a listener, Hank. He said, I cut this out from a local paper in Dallas, Texas, years ago. He says, I don't remember exactly when, but it was right before or after the media scare of 2014. I kept it on the wall of my office, an example of crude propaganda. And if you can see this here, it says, this is Stan. He has Ebola, so you don't have to. It was Ebola Stan. And no, that is not the country where this is all happening. We talk about all these different countries that end in Stan, and I think it was Gary North or somebody at one point in time just referred to the whole area as Chaos Stan, right? So, whether you're talking about Afghanistan or Pakistan or Kazakhstan, all these different Stans, he said the whole area, Chaos Stan. Well, there's Ebola Stan. And it was kind of interesting, they were talking about how they were using this thing here, this artificial thing, and how that was going to help people to get through Ebola. But again, it is not something. I had people who have contacted me want to come on the show and talk about what's going on with Ebola. And I told Karen, I said, sorry, that ship has sailed as far as I'm concerned. I don't believe in viruses or virology, whatever is happening there. I think the people in those areas have got it right. I think there's something going on with those different facilities that have been set up by these public health officials and Bill Gates. I think that is the source of whatever they're doing to those people, those poor people. And this is also sent to me by Hank. It's talking about climate control. He said they're always looking for a new way to push fear about this and to use that as a way to throttle us. That usual MacGuffin. You're going to have to we're going to have to take this away from you because everybody's going to die. So they go from climate change, from global warming to climate change, and now at this point, what they're trying to tell us is that humans are causing the Earth's axis to tilt based on human activity. The Earth has tilted 31.5 inches. That shouldn't happen, says Popular Mechanics. Well, I guess the answer is for us to all lean left and to get into environmentalism, right? We can take care of that shift, that tilt. We can just lean left. It's very much like that. There was I can't even remember if it was a woman or a man. It was in Congress. And they actually said something about an island that they thought was going to tip over because they had too many people on it. If you remember that. I don't remember who that was, but they actually said that. And they come up with the darndest things, don't they? It's not just kids who say the darndest thing. That was Art Linkletter. People in Washington say the darndest things. When humans pump underwater groundwater, it has a substantial impact on the Earth's rotation. Yeah, right. Just imagine what's going to happen with the data centers when they start using all that water. It's going to completely flip us over, I guess. And the people that are most worried are the ones who think the Earth is flat. Additionally, a study documents just how much of an influence groundwater pumping has on climate change. Really? No, I don't think so. But we're going to talk about something when we come back that I think is a real problem. Eugenics. And this is something that is newly changed. Now, we've heard for the longest time, they talk about CRISPR, and they talk about it as if they've got a scalpel out there that they can go in and fix whatever they want. When you look at it, the people who have used it for cattle breeding and things like that. One of them, his comment, I thought really stuck with me. He said, it's not so much a scalpel, it's more like a chainsaw, and it can be a really crude tool. If you understand really how this works, it's based on some kind of a bacteria that they found in some geysers in Yellowstone. And they just kind of transfer what they want to use to modify to this carrier, essentially. And then they put it in proximity to what they want to change, and it somehow magically kind of does what they want. But as you might guess, in something that is that crude, I mean, it is not the situation like they like to sell it to you. They talk about it being a scalpel where they go in and they cut the DNA and they splice this and splice that. And so everybody thinks about it in terms of Jurassic Park, where they show people using this tremendous magnification and they go in and they're performing a little operation. No, it's not like that at all. You're sending this thing in and hoping that it attaches and piggybacks in the right area and makes the right change and doesn't change anything else. But it's not even that. They've got a new tool now that they said is much more accurate. And so now they're talking about eugenics in a big way. So we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back, and we're going to talk about that and the ethics involved in it, because it's very important that people understand what is really happening with all this stuff.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear Klaus, your annual global risk report makes for a stunning and sobering read. For the global business community, the top concern for the next 2 years is not conflict or climate. It is disinformation and misinformation, followed closely by polarization within our societies.
In a world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. You are listening to The David Knight Show.
If you like the Eagles,
on a dark desert highway,
the Cars, and Huey Lewis in the News,
they say the heart of rock and roll is forbidden.
you'll love the Classic Hits channel at APS Radio. Download our app or listen now at apsradio.com.
Before I go on the next section, let me cover some of the comments that we've got here. Nibiru 2029 says Israel doesn't send donations. It only launders back the funds that Marx America's Congress funnels into their masters. You're absolutely right. Yeah, they get massive amounts of money from the U.S. Congress, and they do the kickback to those people. Sydney Falco, did you guys hear the slip in Jared Kushner's video about their new private island where it was the Rothschilds boat that they were shopping for islands from? The Trump family and the Rothschilds all shopping for a bug-out island together. One ruined the USA, the other ruined the UK, respectively. Yeah, it has really got the people in Albania fired up, and they're about to have a revolution there. First, you got... I don't have the clip of Ivanka, but she was saying, yeah, we were out there and went out on this island and we climbed it, barefoot, and it was just wonderful. We've got to have this island. Well, it's a big island that is there, as a matter of fact. And let me see if I can find the clip here. This right here. This is people in Albania are having a big pushback against this. They don't want to see this. But, of course, it's always the elites love their islands, don't they? Got to have a place to get away from all of the hoi polloi, right?
As an Albanian, I will tell you why we are rioting. We are rioting because there is no schools, there is no pension for pensioners, there is no hospital, there is no medicine, there is no parks for kids, there is no normal salary. You're telling us you want to build a 5-star resort to give jobs to Albanians. Meanwhile, the whole Albania is filled up with Philippines working for less than what you pay us. It's not their fault. They have nothing back home. You want to build a 5-star resort. How about you clean up the mess you've made for the last 15 years? We are so tired of you embarrassing us worldwide, telling CNN that there's no protest going on, it's fake news, there's no land being rented off. Meanwhile, Ivanka Trump is on an interview saying she discovered an island. How convenient. 2 years ago, you changed the law, and in a protected area now, you can build as long as it attracts tourism. And how convenient for Miss Ivanka Trump. The land in question has bunkers, tunnels, and it's in a strategic position for whatever they've got planned. Maybe my parents didn't have the strength because they were forced to go somewhere else for their future. But me, I'ma speak up every chance that I have. This is not gonna happen under my watch, Mr. Edirama. You're done.
Yeah, and so, it is the elites are always all looking for a bug out place. And I think there's an element of that in what Trump is doing with the White House. I think they know exactly what they're doing. I think they know the times that they're living in. They don't want you to think about the fourth turning. They use all the terms from Strauss and Howe, the millennials and Generation X and Generation Z and all the rest, but don't say anything about the fourth turning. We don't want people to know that there is a cycle in history that repeats itself about every 4 generations. They want to exploit that without you knowing what is really going on. That's the key thing that's there. AP Rumble Seat says the Mars mania is for the delusional elites, for their literal breakaway civilizational obsession after they successfully destroyed Earth. I absolutely agree with that. When you look at what Hugo de Garis said.
At a certain point, the islands aren't far enough away from the peasants that they've wronged.
That's right. That was the central thesis of Hugo de Garis's book. First of all, he said, we are creating with artificial intelligence, and that was his area of expertise. He said, we're creating this godlike intelligence that is most likely going to destroy us. And he said, every time I go around and I ask other scientists, if you knew that was what you were going to do, if you were certain that's what was going, would you still do it? And he said the majority of them said yes, always. That's why, I've seen some of these other people talk about this. There's this one guy who specializes in AI safety, and he's trying to talk about the issues that are there. And he says, I think we just need to get this word out to all of the scientists. Why should we do this? So we try to do something that is artificial general intelligence or a super intelligence. That is something that we're not going to be able to control if we're successful in it. So why should we do that? It's going to destroy society, and then it may kill humanity as well. So he said, why would we even do that? And the answer is, why indeed? There is a satanic obsession with that. It's the same kind of obsession that caused people to build things like the Tower of Babel, frankly. He says, yes, if we have a very narrow artificial intelligence, that is a tool that you can use. You can set up something that's going to do, let's say, medical research or something like that, but it's very narrow in terms of what it's doing. But when they set up general intelligence, that is something that's going to really come back and bite us. Well, that was part of what Hugo de Garis was talking about. But the other part of it was the fact that the elites who are pushing this stuff through, when people realized what they were doing, and people are starting to realize what they're doing now, they're looking at a situation as Gerald Celente talks about. He says, you look at Gen Z and others, they're looking at the future and they don't see a future. These people who are booing the commencement speakers who talk positively about artificial intelligence, they get booed off the stage. If you attack artificial intelligence, you get cheered, just like Steve Wozniak did. So people already realize what is happening. Hugo de Garis was absolutely right about that. What he thought would happen, it's happening faster than he thought it would. And he thought what would happen is that the elites would go into space to get away from all of us. Otherwise, we would wind up killing them. And we're starting to go down that path, aren't we? People are sharpening the pitchforks right now as we speak, but in many different areas. But he said they would unleash against us their technology, their autonomous killing robots and that type of thing. And there would be giga death, as he pointed out. Billions of people killed with this. And so they can't make it to space yet, but they're looking for their private islands, aren't they? And people like Zuckerberg investing massive amounts of money in his bug out bunker. But let's take a look at another abomination that is here, and that is the new embryo editing techniques that take us a step closer to designing babies without disease. That's the way that it is presented by Reason Magazine. And I got to just say that in this article, Reason misses it yet again. They look at these issues devoid of any ethics. In the same way that Trump looks at the wars devoid of any ethics or law. He just looks at how lethal he can make it and how much money he can make out of it. And many times that's what happens in terms of reason, just as they completely missed the boat in terms of social media censorship. I remember they always poo-pooed the idea that there was any conspiracy from government. And they didn't really even take it back even after the documents were released. But you could discern where this was all coming from. You could see that very easily back in 2016, 2017, and then it really hit the fan in 2018. We knew it was coming from the government. It was pretty clear based on who they were censoring. 2018, after they shut down InfoWars social media sites, within the next 2 months, they shut down over 800 sites like Free Thought Project and others who were not pro-Trump. They were against the police surveillance state. They were against the military-industrial complex. Those are the ones that they were shutting down. And so we knew where this was all coming from, and yet you would have people, go ahead.
It's not really, a well thought out argument to say that if it's a private company doing it, then, they can go crazy with it. It wasn't that, the founding fathers set up these specific legal restrictions for these certain things, and if you find a loophole, go crazy. It's just that when the government has all this information on its citizens, they tend to abuse that, regardless of how they get it. It's a problem if the corporations give it to them, even if they had been doing it all on their own without any pressure from the government to do that for them. That should have been stopped anyway.
That's right. Well, I think it was John Adams who said, we have a form of government that is only works if we have a moral people, right? And we don't have a moral people. There aren't any countries that have a moral people. And so, there's a fundamental flaw in our form of government because it requires us to have some good leaders, which we did at one point in time, but that is a fleeting thing. Once the power is there, it's going to bring in the worst of people. You're right. I said for the longest time that it was the iron fist of government and the velvet glove of private ownership. And I don't know how reason missed that for the longest period of time because we'd already seen this before. We saw it in terms of the surveillance of people using AT&T and this whole idea that, well, that's data that belongs to AT&T. They can turn that over to us if they want. We don't have to get a search warrant. And so it wasn't anything that we hadn't seen exposed over and over and over again. And yet you'd have people like John Stossel who would say, well, they just censored me again. I really hate that they do it, but I support their right to censor me because they're a private corporation. And it's like they're not acting in that capacity even. And as you point out, Lance, even if they were, that is reprehensible. But they don't see the problem, the ethical problems with editing embryos. And understand that when we talk about editing embryos, we're talking about making seed changes. You can go in and you can have an animal and you can do a genetic modification and it might have a temporary effect on them. But eventually what happens is the animal's genetics will take over and it will revert back to where it was before. But if you do this to a newly created embryo, then what happens is that change becomes permanent. And worse than that, it gets passed on to their descendants. That's why they're talking about being a seed change. As a matter of fact, there's that article, I mentioned that book again. What was it? Change Agent. Was that what it was called by Daniel Suarez? Yeah. Lance is a fan of Daniel Suarez's books, and they do have very interesting scenarios that are there. I'm surprised that they haven't been made into movies at this point in time. It just shows you how bankrupt Hollywood is, that they don't make his movies into his books into movies. But the scene that begins the book is one where you've got a couple in a black market situation, and there's some people who know how to do embryo editing, and it's made illegal, but this is happening anyway. And so they go in, and he very cleverly in the book, he has the husband and wife there. One of them is for making the changes. The other one is reluctant to do it. And so you have the guy behind the desk who's trying to sell it and trying to upsell them on different features. And it's a great scene because he talks to them about it. And he says, you're not just helping this child, you're going to be helping your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. And not only that, if you don't do this, think about what a competitive disadvantage you are creating for them. They're going to become an underclass serving these other people. And they have all these different packages. So you can do things to help them mentally. You can do things to help them physically, to make them very strong or athletic, or things that are going to give them longevity. So they had all these different packages. And of course, each one of them was very expensive. And is all being done in a black market. Well, that is science fiction. However, when you look at this, as Reason is saying, the sci-fi scenario that many have feared and that many others have cheered may now be a reality. Columbia University scientists say they have found an efficient and precise way to edit human embryos. Of course, they told us that about CRISPR in the past as well, didn't they? Still, the results are already being heralded as promising and impressive. There's a big improvement on earlier techniques like CRISPR. In 2020, this scientist and his colleagues tried using this on human embryos. Now, that should be illegal, and I thought it was illegal. I mean, even in China, where you had that geneticist who said that he had tackled a hereditary disease, they claimed that they put him in jail. I don't know if they did or not, but I don't know how these guys are allowed to do this type of thing. They snipped out a mutation that could cause blindness, but after that, they said, the embryo repaired the removed gene effectively only about half of the time. The rest of the time, the embryo would delete long sequences of DNA or destroy the entire chromosome where the gene in question was located. It had absolutely catastrophic consequences, they told the Times. And so this is a part of the ethical issues that are here. These tools and techniques that they have do not exist in an idealized form. They don't always work the way that you wanted them to work, right? There's always unintended consequences. And that's one of the biggest issues right here. As people have pointed out, an embryo cannot consent to this type of thing, right? So you can't get informed consent from the patient that you're experimenting on. That ought to be the point at which we stop right there. Because just like with abortion, just like with genocide, just like with slavery, it all begins with the denial of someone's humanity. And once you do that, then you have a free rein to do whatever you wish. It could bring us one step closer to designer babies, constantly invoked by critics, says Reason. Nature Times and the Wall Street Journal articles all contain quotes from people worried about the ethical implications of embryonic gene editing. Fears seem to be woefully misguided and overblown, however, says Reason. They're not worried about this at all. And again, they're looking at it from the technological standpoint. I think there's a lot to fear even from the technology having unintended consequences, yet they just brush away any ethical concerns. The dystopian scenario so many conjure when it comes to this stuff, of rich people creating a race of super babies who exacerbate inequality, is more of a sci-fi trope than a possible future. Once again, the libertarians at Reason are naive in the extreme. If you stop and think about this logically, of course that's where it's going to lead. There's no other way for it to do anything other than that. If you start going down the path of eugenics, you're always going to wind up with a caste-like society. Science fiction is not inventing this. It's just extrapolating this technology to its logical conclusion based on human nature.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't need CRISPR to form caste societies throughout human history and many civilizations.
But think about that. If you've got people who are mentally, physically superior to others, of course, that's going to naturally evolve. The study suggests that we could also design babies to avoid heart disease or sickle cell anemia. And that's something we should celebrate, says Reason Magazine. Well, World Magazine has a little bit different approach to it. They said, let the little children, regardless of genes, come to Jesus. Is the technology to edit genes putting us on a path toward a genetic caste system? And of course, we've seen this over and over again. So the most famous ones are Brave New World and Huxley's Brave New World, as well as Gattaca, okay, if you remember that movie. But that is absolutely where this would logically lead. They say some Christians will look at this technology and see the possibility of repair and of restoration as being morally licit. In other words, something that would be legitimate. While other Christians see it as a Faustian bargain. Let me just say that when we look at this, it's always the government that is the devil in all these details, right? In terms of the Faustian bargain, it is the government which is always going to abuse this technology. That's one of the things that Eisenhower warned us about when he was talking about the military, industrial, and academic complex. He was concerned that all research and technology was being monopolized by the government because of the amount of money that they had to spend on it. And of course, what does the government want with anything that they do? Not just with technology, but with everything they got, whether it's the money or anything else. They want control. If they have a monopoly on technology, then the technology becomes a tool to control people. And that's what we're increasingly seeing from all of these new technologies. They point out here there's too much that could go wrong with us, with this, to use it responsibly. One can think of C.S. Lewis's warnings in The Abolition of Man, where he said humankind's conquest of nature would be used against humankind. There is a moral difference between repairing defective genes that can cause hereditary disease and genetic augmentation aimed at optimization, but the line between them is perilously thin because the technology that allows for one is likely the same technology that will enable the other. And so when you look at the rapid rate that technology is advancing, it's really strange, I think, that reason would not think this through to the logical extreme of where this is headed. We are really opening up a Pandora's box, says World. How could an ostensibly good use of gene editing to eliminate pathologies not lead to a genetically optimized human population, as though human beings possess the power to override the realities of Genesis 3? Furthermore, what guarantees are there that such knowledge will not be wicked for malevolent use in the form of designer babies, creating, in effect, a genetic caste system where the economically well-off can secure their progeny's genetic destiny, while the lower classes are consigned to raising children more likely to have disabilities and disease, and to be deliberately dumbed down, as a matter of fact. Again, this technology is increasingly being used just as tools of control. And when you look at the things that are rapidly advancing, the things that are going to be the most disruptive in our society, there's an acronym for that. GRAIN. Stands for genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, and nanotech. We haven't really seen much from nanotech. I guess it's, they can hide it easily, but we're seeing now, we've been seeing artificial intelligence and robotics, and now genetics is making a big push in the news as well. What they're really doing is providing the baby improvers with a how-to manual for forays beyond the ethical pale. The New York Times draws on the analysis of Urnov, whom it describes as speculating that the new method, once perfected, would appeal to people who don't merely want to address inherited diseases, but want to enhance traits by engineering embryos. And again, we just talked yesterday about the YouTubers who got a lot of pushback from people because they said that they had done an amniocentesis and found that their baby had Down syndrome, so they aborted them. And they said, we're so glad that we have the freedom to do that. So they got a lot of pushback from people. People said things like, you just killed your baby because he wasn't perfect enough for you. And that's the reality of what they did. So there's absolutely no question that people use this for eugenics. People are using the amniocentesis for eugenics as well right now. Scientists quoted in the New York Times article said the ability to fix disease-causing mutations in embryos could be a boon to those who are using IVF, allowing them to implant embryos that they otherwise would have discarded. Here we see the technocratic and utilitarian impulse on full display. A scoring of embryos considered to be worthy of life versus those who are unworthy of life. A sentiment that is not far removed from the Nazi slogan, life unworthy of life. As a matter of fact, that is always the case, isn't it? As I said before, the greatest injustices that we see, human to human, are usually excused because somebody says, well, they're not fully human. We've seen this argument for slavery. We had in the early days of America, people who were slaves, who were black. They were considered to be not fully citizens, not fully human. They had that same argument. They used that same argument for abortion. They use that same argument for war, for genocide. As a matter of fact, here is an Israeli soldier back in 1985 as Israel was attacking Lebanon and killing Christians who is predominantly Christian. And this is what this Israeli Defense Force soldier said in 1985.
I know I'm not dealing here with human beings. I saw them. They are all terrorists and they don't have any human feelings. So I cannot deal with those men how I would have dealt with other soldiers or something like this. Those are not soldiers, they are terrorists.
Why do you say they're not human beings? Because, I mean, they do live here, don't they? They say that they are trying to defend their villages and
But they know, as I know, that I don't want to be here for the war. I am here, and they know, just like all the world, that in 2 months we are going back to Israel. So why they have to kill people? If they want to kill people, it's just because they are crazy.
Yeah, they're crazy. They're terrorists. If they, we invade their country, we kill people here. If they fight back, they don't have a right to exist. They're not human beings. And so if they fight back, they are terrorists. And if they're terrorists, they're not human beings. So I have a right to kill them. And that's the lies that we tell ourselves. And that is what is fundamentally behind all this stuff, whether they're talking about eugenics or genocide, whether they're talking about slavery or abortion. It's dehumanizing the people that God has made in his image. You see, you have to understand, even when we talk about the police state that Trump was so happily creating with ICE, and is still creating with ICE, when he creates that, and I had so many conservatives who get so angry with me, it's like, they don't have any rights. They came here illegally. Oh, okay, so now they're no longer human because they came across the border illegally. I mean, you could make that about any kind of crime that you come up with, right? Oh, that guy was speeding over there, so now he's no longer human. So now, he violated the law, so he's not human anymore. So let's do whatever we want to them. No, our human rights are not based on our citizenship in any particular country. It's not based on our ethnicity anywhere either. It is based on the fact that we're all created in the image of God, as the Declaration of Independence points out, and that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights because of our humanity, not because of our citizenship, not because of anything else. And we don't lose that humanity when we do certain things either. So this is not limited to its impact on one child, but it extends to the hereditable traits that those children themselves pass on. That's what I was talking about. This is a seed change. And so it's something that's going to affect potential future generations. And if you get it wrong, that's going to affect later generations as well. The potential for those edits or for those mistakes to be passed on generationally. Another factor is the bioethical principle of consent. And of course, the embryo cannot consent to this, but they get around that by saying, well, the embryo isn't human. That's the basis of abortion. So what of potential parents and scientists playing God? We must consider whether human beings possess the wisdom, the ability, the moral standing, and the foresight to re-engineer the human genome at the level of inherited transmission across multiple generations. Yeah, when we start to look at this, I think what government institutions do is they amplify the very worst aspects of humanity. And what we see with government institutions are humanity at its worst, magnified, as a matter of fact. Christian ethics, however, speak a different word, a better word. All humans, diseased and disabled alike, do not find their worth and dignity in the perfection of their genes, but in their status as beloved, created children of God, in whose image they are made. You see, it is in this essence that America is a Christian nation. We're not a Christian nation because we got people like Hegseth who quote the Bible when they go out to war and kill people and say, yeah, I'm doing God's work here. No, that's not what Christian nation is about. Christian nation is the fact that we are based on the idea that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That's a Christian idea. And that is what we have to retreat to when we see these things of genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, and of course the coming nanotech threats. Jesus does not differentiate among the children he calls to come to him. It was not the blonde-haired, blue-eyed children that Jesus called for. Just as Jesus welcomed lepers and sick who sought him out, so the church must proclaim that like his arms, we are open to all children, not just the genetically optimized. Regardless of where Christians fall in this debate, we must welcome children, not engineer them. And you know, this is when you talk about what Christ did. He didn't just go to the Jews. He made a point of reaching out and saying positive things about Samaritans. The whole point of the Good Samaritan parable is to talk about the humanity of the Good Samaritan and how there was one individual of all the people who passed by and didn't help him. There was one individual who did help him, who did see him as human being, because the Jews looked down on the Samaritans. They had been, they were a mixed race. They had been carried away into Assyrian captivity and came back into the area, and they had, their religion had been syncretized, had been mixed in with other things. Their genetics, their background had been mixed with other pagan and things, and so they despised them and hated them. But many times Jesus talked about them and talked about their humanity. And that is the reality. You know, as I pointed out yesterday, that Times of Israel article, where the headline was, to dislike certain ethnicities is racist, but to see Jews as equal is anti-Semitic. No, you are equal. You're no better, and you're no worse than anybody else, but you're no better either. And to say otherwise is just the worst kind of Nazi kind of master race lies that Zionism is based on. And it's why they believe that they can go into other areas and just commit mass murder, as they've done over and over again, as they're doing right now in Lebanon. And so the question is, are Christians capable of speaking to these ethical issues? Are we capable of offering ethical guidance to our society? You know, we don't oppose the vaccine poison that is out there. As a matter of fact, we've got some pastors who cheer it. We've got some pastors who cheer war if it's for Israel. We got some pastors on the left who cheer LGBT stuff, right? And even including the mutilation and sterilization of children. But they cheer this rebellion to God, just like the people on the right will cheer war and mass murder. And so we have, when you look at this, just take a look at this clip here. This is Children's Self Defense talking about a lawsuit that's being brought against the government for this vaccine schedule of 72 vaccines. If we're willing to do this to children, do you think people are going to be willing to do genetic experimentation on them as well? I mean, aren't we already with the GCI, the genetic code injections that Trump put out there? He even began his second term by saying, yeah, we're going to use artificial intelligence to design specific genetic treatments that we're going to inject into you with mRNA.
The CDC is actually being sued for operating an illegal and unconstitutional 72-dose hypervaccination schedule. All 72 of these doses from birth to age 18, not one has been tested in combination And particularly the cumulative safety of 72 doses was never studied. So it's literally just experimental at this point. Nobody knows what's going to happen with all of these doses. And that's exactly why they're being sued, to kind of dismantle this dangerous program. And so this is huge. This whole vaccine ideology is now crumbling down as people begin to understand the real risks and just how absurd it is. And even Trump highlighted that. He said it's a travesty we're injecting beautiful babies with all these toxic loads of
but he won't stop it. And he gets rid of the people who speak out against it. That's the hypocrisy of what Trump does. Well, I'll just say, because we're nearly at the end of the program, there is one more thing I want to show you, and that is the fact that we had Steven Spielberg out there saying, when people see the information coming out from government about UFOs, when they see his program, his little set piece, his little film that he's got there, he says it's going to leave Christians questioning their faith in God. No, it should leave us questioning our faith in government and our faith in anything coming out of Hollywood, as a matter of fact. I don't think if you got a faith that can be shaken by Steven Spielberg and his ilk, or by Donald Trump and his ilk, you don't have any faith in God. Here's what he had to say.
This truth were just known overnight. If the government announced, yes, we have been keeping this from you since 1947.
And you can count on the government, right?
Mess up a lot of people. And the movie also takes the position of the church. What does this do to the fundamental beliefs that many of us have? And, is God our God only on this planet? Or is God a God for every system where there's civilization, intelligent life, and even developing life?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, if you want answers to that, you'll find the answers in Genesis, and you'll find it at Answers in Genesis website. Ken Ham has thought through this a long time ago. And as he pointed out, it's not just the issues that we've talked about, the practical issues of interstellar transportation, but it's also the theological issues. If you believe Genesis, if you take it as written, you've already got your answer about that. God is God of the universe because God created everything. Nothing evolved. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day. The common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity, created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.
listening to The David Knight Show. You're listening to The David Knight Show. Analyzing the globalists' next move. And now, The David Knight Show. Making sense common again.